A retired soldier and his aging K9 were running through a silent winter storm when the dog suddenly stopped, fur bristling, eyes locked on the storm drain below. Through the swirling snow, they saw her, a young police officer half submerged in icy water, her breath fading, her badge cracked beside her. Who would abandon a police officer in the freezing cold? And why wasn't anyone looking for her? As the veteran climbed down to save her, the dog growled into the darkness, as if the one who did this was still nearby. What they uncovered that night would drag a deadly plot into the light, and only a wounded officer, a battle-scarred veteran, and his loyal K9 stood between the town and a winter catastrophe. Before we begin, where are you watching from? Drop your country below, and don't forget to subscribe. Snow blew sideways over Rust River, turning the small Midwestern town into a blur of dim streetlights, shuttered warehouses, and a half-frozen river muttering behind the buildings. The storm had stripped the color out of everything. Only yellow lamps and red brake lights still fought the gray. Ethan Walker ran into the wind with his head down and his jaw clenched, each breath burning in his chest before the cold ripped it away. At 46, he still moved like a man trained to cross distance quickly, broad-shouldered, thick-armed, compact in the hips and legs. His dark hair, clipped short, showed silver at the temples, and a thin, pale scar traced the curve of his right cheek. Tonight, he wore a faded work jacket, insulated pants, and steel-toed boots. He looked more like a tired laborer than the soldier he used to be. Cooper ran a few strides ahead, his reflection in motion. The German Shepherd was big for his breed, a sable male with a black saddle on his back and intelligent amber eyes. Even in retirement, he wore his old K9 harness on their runs, the padded straps snug across a deep chest built for taking hits and pulling hard. Snow clung to his whiskers and to the thick fur around his neck, but his gait was steady. Ears pricked for sounds Ethan could no longer hear as fast as he once did. Running at night was Ethan's uneasy truce with the past. Ever since he'd come home and traded desert sand for cracked Midwestern sidewalks, sleep had become something he had to earn, not something that simply arrived. The therapist the VA sent him to had told him to move the energy out of your body before bed. So he fixed pipes for the town's water department by day, came home to a small rental house that was either too quiet or too loud in his head, and when the walls felt like they were closing in, he leashed Cooper and followed the river road into whatever weather waited outside. They passed the dark hulks of the old warehouses, brick walls streaked with ice, and the skeletal outline of a crane that had not moved in years. The wind knifed down the open lane of asphalt, carrying fine snow that scraped along the pavement like sand. Ethan counted his breaths the way he'd been taught. In for 4, out for 6. Feel your feet. Listen to your body. Stay here. Stay now. Beside him, Cooper's claws clicked faintly on patches of ice, tail low but relaxed. It was when they neared the stormwater outflow, where the industrial park met the river, that Cooper changed. One moment he was trotting, head level, tongue just visible in the cold. The next he stiffened and stopped so abruptly that Ethan had to jerk the leash to keep from stumbling into him. "Easy, buddy," Ethan said, catching his balance. "What is it?" Cooper's whole frame was wired, his tail leveled, his ears tipped hard forward, and his nose lifted as he drew in the air. Then he leaned into the leash, pulling Ethan toward the guardrail with a strength that came from certainty, not curiosity. The steady, almost meditative rhythm of the run snapped. Something older stirred under Ethan's ribs, a field awareness he had never entirely shaken, even after years of pretending he was just a man who fixed pipes. He wrapped the leash once around his gloved fist and leaned over the metal rail. The river wind surged up to meet him, sharp with the smells of cold water, concrete, and rust. Under all that was another scent, thin but unmistakable to anyone who had spent time in combat zones and emergency rooms, the metallic edge of fresh blood. His throat went dry. Ethan pulled a small tactical flashlight from his jacket pocket and clicked it on. The narrow beam cut through the drifting flakes and traced the slope of the concrete embankment down to the outflow. Snow lay in torn patches, clinging to bolts and cracks. A trickle of water slid from the black mouth of the pipe, icing as it ran. The light found a shape lodged in the shallow trough beneath the pipe. At first, his mind labeled it as garbage, an abandoned tarp, a black bag half buried in slush. Then the beam picked out the curve of a bare hand, fingers splayed, skin too pale even for this cold, a dark sleeve, a cheek pressed flat to the ice. The word body rose in his mind, quiet and heavy. "Stay," he said. Cooper dropped into an instant down beside the guardrail, though a thin whine slipped from his throat. Ethan swung one leg over the rail and tested the concrete slope with his boot. The thin ice crust snapped under his weight. He moved sideways, one hand on the rail, the other keeping the flashlight's beam steady on the motionless figure below. He slid the last meter and landed in a shallow skin of half-frozen water that splashed up into his boots. The cold knifed through wool socks in a heartbeat. Up close, the figure resolved into a woman lying on her side, one shoulder jammed against the wall, dark hair fanned wet around her face. Snow had begun to gather along her collar and the ridge of her cheek, trying to make her part of the landscape. "Ma'am," Ethan called, breath fogging in front of the light. "Can you hear me?" He knelt, the water soaking his pants to the knees, and rolled her gently toward him. She looked younger than him by a good 15 years, maybe late 20s, with olive skin gone waxy under the cold. One cheekbone was marred by an ugly purple bruise, and there was dried blood at the corner of her mouth. Her lips had the faint bluish tint of someone who had been in the cold far too long. Beneath her torn outer jacket, he saw navy cloth and the squared cut of a uniform shirt. A police officer, he realized. For a moment, the concrete blurred, and his hands remembered sand and dust instead of ice. Another uniform, another face, different war. The urge to recoil from the memory rose hard and fast. Not now. He forced his focus back into the present and pressed 2 fingers against the side of her neck. For a second, he felt nothing. Then, just when his stomach began to sink, he found a pulse, thin, rapid, fluttering against his glove. "You're still here?" he murmured. "Good. Stay." Above them, Cooper barked once, short and sharp. Ethan glanced up. The dog's silhouette moved along the rim, head turning as he scanned the road and river both, always on perimeter, even when no one had ordered him there. "Keep watch," Ethan called softly. "I've got her." He swept the flashlight down along the woman's side, searching for what else might be wrong. Her winter jacket was soaked and stiff, patrol pants spattered with ice. Her duty belt had twisted, half submerged in the shallow water. Just above her right hip, the navy fabric was torn and darkened. When he shifted the jacket aside with careful fingers, he saw the ragged edge of a bullet hole crudely packed with strips of what looked like her own undershirt. She had tried to stop the bleeding herself before she went down. That told him 2 things. She had training, and she had no intention of dying easily. A bent metal badge lay in the slush near her hand, half frozen into the thin layer of ice. Ethan pried it free and brushed away the snow. The familiar crest of the Rust River Police Department stared back at him. The nameplate pinned to her chest, scratched but readable, told him the rest. Brooks Maya. "Officer Brooks," he said quietly, letting the name settle in the cold air. "All right, Maya, we're not leaving you here." At the sound of her name, her eyelids fluttered. One dark eye cracked open a fraction, not really seeing him, but tracking in his direction. Her mouth moved. He bent closer. "Don't take me back," she rasped. "He'll finish it." The words were barely sound, but they carried intent. Fear, yes, but something fierce under it too. He wanted to ask a dozen questions. Who? Back where? What happened? But the way her chest hitched under his arm told him that if he wasted time on answers down here, she might not live long enough to give him any. "Whoever he is," Ethan said, steady as he could manage, "he's not the one touching you right now. I am, and I'm getting you out of this hole." He shrugged out of his jacket, fingers clumsy for a moment as the wind bit through his damp shirt. Working as gently as urgency allowed, he lifted her shoulders and wrapped the jacket around her torso, tucking it in close to trap what warmth she had left. She groaned low in her throat, hand twitching toward the wound, but did not truly wake. "This part's going to be rough," he warned her anyway. "Staying here is worse." He shifted his stance, braced his boots against the slick concrete, and gathered her up, one arm under her knees, the other behind her back. She was lighter than he expected, but cold water and soaked fabric dragged at every movement. The slope up to the guardrail seemed much steeper from this angle, the surface polished by melt and refreeze. Above, Cooper lay flat again, head extended over the edge, ears flattened to the skull. His eyes never left Ethan. When Ethan took the first step up, boots slipping before they bit, the dog whined, a small sound that somehow held all the worry words never could. "Yeah, I know," Ethan muttered through gritted teeth. "You pick terrible nights for heroics, Walker." The muttered complaint was half to himself, half to a sky that had never answered him, but the touch of humor kept his hands from shaking. He focused on simple things. Keep your feet under you. Keep her head against your shoulder. Don't look down. One step, then another. The river roared unseen in the dark, indifferent to the small struggle on its edge. The wind howled along the channel. Snow raced past, erasing whatever tracks had led her to this place. But it could not erase the fact that someone had shot a young officer, crudely dressed her wound, and left her in a storm drain on a freezing night. That was not misfortune. That was a choice. Whoever he was, Ethan thought, had just invited the wrong man into his mess. At last, his reaching hand found the cold metal of the guardrail. He hooked an elbow over it, used the leverage to haul both their bodies the last few inches up and over the lip. His boots hit plowed snow at the roadside. He staggered, corrected, kept his grip. Cooper was right there, pressing in close, nose nudging Maya's limp hand before he looked up at Ethan with anxious, questioning eyes. "I see her," Ethan said, chest heaving. "She's breathing. That's enough for now." He adjusted his hold on Officer Maya Brooks, feeling the faint rise and fall of her chest against his own. The town's dim lights blurred behind the curtain of snow. Somewhere out there was the man she feared, and the reason she'd been thrown into the dark. Out here, on the frozen edge of Rust River, Ethan knew only one thing for certain. He was not putting her back down in the snow. The snow hadn't let up. It fell in heavy, slanting sheets that turned Rust River's industrial edge into a blur of white and shadow, swallowing the orange glow of distant security lights and the last faint trace of the river's dark surface. Wind came off the water like a living thing, clawing at skin, sneaking under collars, turning every breath into a knife. Ethan Walker's lungs burned as he dragged himself and the unconscious officer up the icy slope from the storm drain. His thighs trembled from effort, boots slipping on frozen mud. The woman was lighter than most of the men he used to carry in the desert, but the cold made everything feel heavier, as if winter itself was clinging to her uniform. Her head lolled against his shoulder, dark hair plastered to her cheek with dirty ice. Cooper paced anxiously at his side, the German shepherd's thick sable coat crusted with snow, amber eyes locked on Ethan, as if asking what to do next. "Stay with me," Ethan muttered to her, his breath puffing white in the beam of his small flashlight. "Come on, officer. You didn't crawl all the way to that grate just to quit now." Her breath was a ghost against his neck, faint, stuttering, but there. He reached the edge of the service road and paused, chest heaving, shoulders rising and falling under his worn gray parka. A faint tremor rode his hands that had nothing to do with the cold. For a split second, the smell of wet concrete and metal transformed into hot dust and diesel, and he saw not a storm drain, but the broken lip of a blown-out culvert in Kandahar, a different body slipping from his grip. Not tonight. Not again. He blinked hard and forced the memory back into its box. The asphalt here was barely a road, just a strip of cracked pavement used by city maintenance trucks and the occasional fisherman. His beat-up Ford pickup sat 100 yards away, half buried in drifting snow. Its dark green paint faded to almost black in the night. "Cooper! Truck!" he grunted. The dog obeyed instantly, loping ahead with a stiff-legged trot, claws clicking faintly on spots of exposed asphalt. Ethan adjusted his grip, one arm under the officer's knees, the other around her back. Her radio mic dangled uselessly from her shoulder strap. The antenna snapped. He could smell blood, metallic and sharp, even through the stink of the sewer that clung to her. By the time he reached the truck, his breath came in ragged bursts, and the scar along his left rib cage throbbed under the layers of thermal and flannel. He should have been done with carrying broken bodies through the dark. He thought civilian life would mean fixing pipes and water heaters, not this. He eased the woman into the passenger seat, carefully lowering her so her head rested against the torn headrest. The dashboard lights painted her face in a dim amber, revealing more than he'd seen down in the drain. Bruises along her jaw, a split lip, the ugly blue-black swelling, starting around one eye. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with strong cheekbones and a stubborn chin. Her uniform shirt clung damply to her frame, the fabric torn where someone had grabbed and dragged her. Cooper jumped into the back seat, then pushed his heavy head between the front seats, sniffing at her face, whining low in his throat. "Easy," Ethan murmured, reaching for the ignition. The engine coughed twice, then caught, shuddering the whole truck as warm air began to trickle uselessly from the vents. He cranked the heater up anyway and stripped off his outer parka, draping it over her. Her name tag caught the light for the first time. Brooks. "Officer Brooks," he said aloud, as if the sound of it might anchor her to the world. "You picked the worst night in Illinois to pick a fight." Her eyelids fluttered. She made a small noise, half groan, half protest, and her fingers twitched on his arm. Ethan leaned closer. "Hey, you're okay. I've got you. Just stay with me." Her throat worked as she tried to swallow. Her voice came out a broken whisper, each word scraped raw by cold and shock. "Rick, my captain." Her lips trembled. He killed the engineer. Riverside plant. Something there. Not an accident." Her eyes rolled back and she sagged against the seat again, breath shortening into shallow, rapid pulls. Ethan stared at her for a moment, his jaw tightening. Riverside plant. He knew the place too well, the low, wide sprawl of concrete tanks and metal towers that clung to the riverbank like a rusted barnacle. The chemical facility that treated and stored half the town's industrial waste before pumping cleaned water back into Rust River. He had done contract work in their basements a few times, repiping old lines, fixing leaks they swore were minor. Every time he went, he'd smelled things he didn't want to name and seen the way the plant manager's smile never quite reached his calculating gray eyes. "Damn," Ethan breathed, softly enough that the word bled into the wind. He glanced at the dark road ahead, an empty ribbon disappearing into the snow. The obvious move was to drive straight to the hospital, dump her in the emergency room, and let the system do what it was built to do. But something in her broken words lodged between his ribs like shrapnel. "My captain killed the engineer." If the man who commanded her badge wanted her dead badly enough to dump her in a culvert no one patrolled in winter, what would he do if he found out she'd survived? And that she'd been found? Cooper let out a short, sharp bark, ears snapping forward. Ethan's head jerked up. In the rearview mirror, through the veil of snow, a pair of headlights had appeared around the distant curve of the service road. They were moving slowly, too slowly for someone just trying to get home. The light beams swept the ditches on either side of the road, as if searching. The truck's heater hadn't yet chased away the chill, but Ethan felt sweat bead under his collar. Instinct clamped down over his chest like a familiar harness. "Of course," he muttered. "Of course they'd come back to check." He killed the headlights, but left the engine idling low, plunging the interior into shadows. The distant vehicle crept closer, its lights cutting bright tunnels through the drifting snow. It wasn't the rolling, bouncing approach of a plow or a regular sedan. The silhouette was higher, squarer, an SUV or a department-issued truck. Ethan's mind worked fast, the same way it had back when a wrong choice meant a body bag. If he tried to outrun them on this narrow strip of ice, they'd see his taillights immediately. If he stayed put, they might spot the truck. An old Ford wasn't exactly invisible out here, and the bleeding police officer in his passenger seat would be impossible to explain away to the very people who wanted her gone. He looked at her again. Her lips were turning a frightening shade of blue. The parka helped, but not enough. He didn't have time to debate ethics with himself. "Okay," he said softly, but his voice had the flat calm of someone who had already survived too many worse days. "New plan." He reached back and grabbed a thick canvas tarp and an old wool blanket from behind the seats. The kind of emergency gear every mechanic in Rust River kept out of habit. Then he slid one arm under Officer Brooks again, surprised by how little she weighed. Cooper hopped out the second he opened the door, landing in the snow with a muted thump, tail stiff as a board. Outside, the wind bit his face like a swarm of needles. The oncoming headlights were closer now, their glow visible from ground level, approaching through the veils of white. Ethan shifted her weight higher against his chest, keeping the parka wrapped tight around her, and turned away from the road. "Come on," he whispered. "Stay with me just a little longer." He half ran, half stumbled down the slight embankment opposite the storm drain, boots crunching through crusted snow into a patch of tall, dead reeds that lined the frozen, marshy edge of the river. The cattails, stiff and brittle, brushed his coat with a dry hiss as he pushed through, carving a narrow path into the thicket. Cooper trotted ahead, then circled back, then forged ahead again, his breath a steady plume. The dog understood cover as well as any soldier. When Ethan dropped to one knee in a shallow hollow between clumps of grass, Cooper lay down instantly at the edge, making himself a low, solid shape between Ethan and the open world. Ethan eased Maya onto the wool blanket, then pulled the tarp loosely over them, leaving just enough gap for air. The reeds hid them from the road. The snow covered almost everything else. The smell of the river, cold, metallic, tinged with something chemical, filled his nose. Up on the road, tires crunched to a stop on ice. Through the narrow gaps in the reeds, he saw the SUV clearly now. Black, city-issued, salt and dirt streaked along the sides. Its headlights swept across the storm drain grate where he'd been not 10 minutes ago. Doors opened with solid, practice thuds. The figures that stepped out were bundled in dark parkas with department patches on the shoulders, their flashlights slicing through the snow like white knives. One of them stepped into the beam of his own thunderstorm of memory long enough for Ethan's stomach to clench. The man was in his early 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, with a cop's squared-off posture and a jaw that looked carved from stone. Even under the hood, Ethan recognized the lined, weather-toughened face from news segments and the occasional glimpse in town. Captain Rick Coleman, head of the Rust River police shift that covered this sector. His reputation was solid, decorated, strict, fond of phrases like blue family and doing it by the book. Seeing him out here, at this hour, in this storm, changed the color of Maya's broken whisper completely. "Check the banks," Rick called over the wind. His voice carried clearly in the stillness between gusts. "She won't have gone far. That current's slow in winter." Another officer, shorter and thicker around the middle, swept his light along the edge of the road, then down toward the reeds, the beam passing inches over Ethan's tarp. Cooper's muscles tensed under Ethan's hand. The dog's throat vibrated with a growl, but he held it in, trained discipline, battling instinct. "What if she crawled out?" the second man asked, breath gusting in white clouds. "With that wound, she won't last long." "She's not supposed to last at all," Rick replied matter-of-factly. He took a few steps toward the storm drain, boots grinding gravel and ice. His light lingered on the dark stains still visible on the concrete lip where they had dragged her out. "Check it again. If she's not here, she's in the river or frozen stiff. Either way, I want eyes on it." Ethan swallowed hard against the urge to move. His heart hammered in his ears, but his training turned his body into stone. Beside him, Officer Brooks let out a faint, involuntary whimper. He clamped his gloved hand gently over her mouth, not to silence her out of cruelty, but to borrow just a few more seconds of silence. Rick paced along the edge of the road, his light probing the darkness. For a moment, it dazzled straight into the reeds, and Ethan felt his entire world narrow to a single pinpoint of brutal white. Then the beam moved on. "Cap, you really think she saw something?" the shorter officer asked, voice low. "Maybe she just snapped. After the engineer, all that talk." Rick stopped, turning slightly so Ethan could see the side of his face. Snowflakes clung to the stubble along his jaw. His expression was calm, too calm. "She saw enough to cause trouble," he said. "It doesn't matter what she thinks she knows. What matters is that nobody believes her." He flicked his light off and slid it into his pocket. "If some jogger or drunk finds her, she's a tragic line-of-duty death. If she disappears in the snow, she's a missing person. Either way, Riverside Plant gets to finish their expansion and the city gets its checks. Understand?" The other man hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir." Rick's next words cut through the reeds like the wind itself. "Either way," he said quietly, "she doesn't see another sunrise. That girl needs to die tonight." Ethan felt something inside him go terribly, perfectly still. Not the numbness of shock, he knew that old companion too well, but a colder, sharper clarity. The kind that had settled over him years ago when orders came down that never made sense, and he had to decide which orders he still believed in. Up on the road, doors slammed shut again. The SUV's engine revved and the vehicle turned slowly, its tires slipping briefly on the ice before finding traction. Headlights swept the reeds one last time, then moved away, shrinking until they were just twin embers in the snow, then nothing at all. Only when the sound of the engine faded completely did Ethan let out the breath he'd been holding. His chest ached. His hand slipped gently away from Maya's mouth. Her skin was like ice beneath his glove. Cooper shifted, scooting closer, pressing his warm body against Ethan's side. The dog's amber eyes glowed faintly in the dark, fixed not on the road, but on Ethan, waiting for a cue. "So that's how it is?" Ethan whispered, barely audible above the wind. "All right, then." He looked down at the woman, half buried under his coat and blanket, at the bruises on her face and the badge that bore the same color blue as the men who had just left her for dead. Something heavy settled in his chest, not just anger, but a grim, almost weary sense of purpose. He hadn't gone looking for another war, but tonight, winter had delivered one to his doorstep anyway. "Hang on, Officer Brooks," he murmured, voice rough but steady. "They want you gone. That means you're the only one who saw the truth, and I'm not about to let the snow cover that up." The wind howled over the reeds, carrying the sound of the river beneath the ice. In the darkness, Ethan began to plan. The cabin at the forest's edge sat half buried under a fresh blanket of snow, its windows glowing faintly against the cold, like a lighthouse muffled in fog. Ethan pushed the door open with his shoulder, carrying Maya's weight as carefully as if she were made of thin ice. The warm interior smelled of cedar, pine tar, and old wool blankets. Everything meant to keep a man from freezing in winter, physically or otherwise. Cooper padded in first, shaking off clumps of snow, his amber eyes scanning the small space with protective sharpness. Ethan lowered Maya, still unconscious, onto the narrow wooden bed by the wall. Up close, her face revealed details he hadn't noticed amid the adrenaline, a faint scar under her right cheekbone, the kind earned from a fall or a rough childhood. Brows knotted even in sleep, lips pale from cold, yet stubbornly pressed together as if refusing to surrender. She looked young, too young to be hunted. Ethan wrapped a thermal blanket around her shoulders, set a small space heater near the bed, and placed warm compresses around her hands. Cooper sat beside him, whining under his breath, sensing the severity. "She's breathing," Ethan murmured, though mostly talking to himself. "Light, but steady." Cooper laid his head on his paws, ears flicking toward the door every few seconds as if expecting danger to arrive on the wind. It took nearly an hour for Maya to stir. Her eyelids fluttered open, unfocused at first, then narrowed in confusion. "Where?" Her voice cracked like a dry branch. "You're safe," Ethan said. "For now." Her eyes moved from him to Cooper, then to the unfamiliar cabin walls. When she tried to sit up, she winced as pain shot through her ribs. "Easy," Ethan said, pressing a steadying hand against her shoulder. His hand was rough, calloused, hands that had built things and broken things in equal measure. "You fell into the storm drain, or someone pushed you there." Memory flickered across her face, sharp enough to make her tremble. "Rick," she whispered, "I shouldn't be alive." Ethan dragged a chair close and sat. He kept his voice low, steady, the way he used to speak to soldiers shaking after their first firefight. "Tell me what happened." Maya swallowed, fighting a wave of panic. Her hair, dark and soaked earlier, now framed her face in uneven strands. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "There was a man, a safety engineer. Name was Oliver Hayes, mid-50s. Quiet guy, gray beard, always carried a notebook full of equations and airflow diagrams. People called him the Watcher because he noticed everything." Ethan nodded slightly. He knew the type. Men who worked in silence until their conscience forced them to speak. Oliver discovered Riverside plant was overriding its toxic gas monitors during night cycles. He said someone was doing it deliberately. He tried to report it, but the system locked him out. So he came. To me. Her breath caught. Because I was still new and still believed rules mattered. "You recorded him?" Ethan guessed. "Yes, a small clip." He explained the readings, the cover-up. "He looked scared." She hesitated, gripping the blanket tighter. "That same night, Rick and 2 others cornered him in the maintenance bay. I followed from the shadows. They pushed him into one of the lower tunnels. I heard the fall." Her voice cracked. "He never screamed. It was just one sound, and then nothing." Ethan's jaw tightened, a dark memory in his own chest stirring, men falling in silence, swallowed by dust and fire. "I filmed part of it," Maya continued. "Rick caught me. He grabbed my radio, smashed it, and told me I'd slipped on the ice and wouldn't make it to the next shift. Then he aimed his gun." She stopped, shivering despite the warmth. "He dragged me to the storm drain and left me there. I hit my head on the pipe, and everything went black." Ethan stared at her for a long moment. "Why you?" "Because I asked too many questions, and because Lennox, plant director, needs this quarter to look perfect. They're about to sign a multi-million-dollar contract for expansion. If toxic leaks get out," her voice trailed, "it would ruin everything. So they decided to ruin you instead," Ethan said. Maya nodded slowly. "They'll frame me for environmental sabotage. A grieving engineer, a rogue officer, a tragic accident in the snow. Case closed." Ethan leaned back, exhaling through his teeth. It wasn't the first time he'd seen a system sacrifice one to protect the many, or the powerful, but it was the first time the victim had landed in his arms. Cooper lifted his head, ears pricking toward the window. A rumble of distant engines cut through the wind, a sound Ethan recognized too well. He moved quickly to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to look out. 2 dark SUVs crawled down the Forest Service road, headlights slicing the snow. "They're searching the area," Ethan said. "They must have tracked your patrol car's signal." Maya pushed herself up again despite the pain. "We need to leave." "No," Ethan said firmly. "You're not strong enough." Maya met his eyes with a stubborn fire, the kind of fire hardened by years of being underestimated. "If Rick finds me alive, he'll finish the job. And he won't hesitate." Ethan tapped a finger against the wooden table, thinking fast. "We need proof, something more than your partial video." Maya swallowed hard. "Oliver kept backup files. He showed me once, stored them in a small drive hidden in his locker. But after he died, Rick cleaned everything." "Not everything," Ethan muttered. "There's always something they overlook." He grabbed his jacket, checked the chamber of the revolver he kept for emergencies, and then fixed Maya with a steady, "Look, you stay here, rest. I'll recon the plant." "No." Maya forced herself upright, gripping the bed frame until her knuckles turned white. I'm coming. I know the layout. I know where they'll hide things. Without me, you'll be walking into a maze." Ethan hesitated. The soldier in him respected her resolve. The human in him feared the cost. A sudden knock shattered the argument. 3 slow taps. A pause. 2 more. Ethan stiffened. "That's Dale's pattern," he whispered. He opened the door cautiously. Dale Marshall, Ethan's former squad mate, stood shivering on the porch, snow clinging to his beard. Dale was in his early 50s, tall but stooped from a back injury sustained by shielding a civilian during a roadside explosion years ago. His face bore deep lines, his eyes sharp despite the exhaustion, and his hands, once steady as a surgeon, now trembled slightly from nerve damage. A man who had lived through too many winters inside and outside himself. "Ethan," Dale said, breath fogging. "I heard the radio chatter. Something's wrong." Ethan stepped aside. "Come in, and close the door behind you." Dale's gaze fell on Maya, and understanding dawned in his eyes. "So, the rumors are true." She straightened. "If you're with Rick—" "I'm not," Dale said quickly. "Haven't worn a badge in 10 years. And if Rick's involved, I want no part of whatever filth he's dragging the town into." Ethan briefed Dale in clipped phrases. Dale listened carefully, jaw clenching tighter with each detail. Finally he said, "If the plant's been overriding toxic sensors, then the system logs will show irregularities. Even if they wiped video, the internal timestamps may still be recoverable." Maya blinked. "You can get them?" Dale shrugged modestly. "Worked a few maintenance jobs at Riverside last winter. Still remember the access routes, and I still have a technician badge they forgot to deactivate." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Then we go tonight." Maya nodded. "It has to be tonight. If Lennox initiates the midnight purge cycle, the entire plant will reset. No evidence will survive." Dale wiped snow from his coat, his eyes shadowed but determined. "Then we'd better move. Storm's thick enough to hide us, but also thick enough to bury us." Ethan looked from Maya to Dale, then down at Cooper, who stared up at him with unspoken resolve. "All right," Ethan said. "We finish what Oliver started." The wind howled outside like a warning, but none of them stepped back. Tonight, truth would either surface, or they would freeze trying. The morning light barely reached Rust River, swallowed by a sky the color of lead. Snow kept falling in steady sheets, muting the entire world into a pale, breathless hush. Inside the cabin, the frost on the windows glowed faintly, as though winter itself had pressed its cold hands against the glass. Ethan Walker barely slept, listening to the shallow breaths of the woman resting on his cot and the low, restless pacing of Cooper, the aging K9, with graying fur around his muzzle and deep amber eyes that had seen too many battles, had not settled since they returned. Maya Brooks drifted in and out of consciousness. Her black hair, damp from melted snow, clung to her forehead, and the bruise on her temple had darkened. Up close, she looked younger than Ethan first assumed, mid-20s maybe, her features sharpened by duty, not age. Yet there was a stubbornness in her jaw, something that suggested she had clawed her way into her position without favors. A fighter, even now, even half frozen. Ethan poured more hot water into a small metal basin as he heard Cooper stiffen. The dog's ears twitched, his body lowering in a silent, defensive posture. Ethan knew that posture. Something outside had changed. He turned on the old radio sitting atop his workbench. Static crackled, then a burst of sharp audio cut through. "Officer Maya Brooks, missing, last seen near the Riverside plant. Investigators now believe she may be connected to sabotage involving plant equipment." Ethan's jaw tightened. The voice belonged to Linda Carver, the town's local reporter. Linda was in her early 40s, sharp-featured with ash-blonde hair she kept pulled tightly into a bun. She had a reputation for digging into stories deeper than the police preferred. Ethan respected her tenacity, even admired it, but now her report was being fed lies. "Authorities have obtained partial footage," Linda continued, suggesting Officer Brooks was present during unauthorized interference at the plant. Maya stirred, eyes fluttering open, confusion clouding her expression until she focused on the radio. She pushed herself upright despite the pain, her breath tremoring. He did it. Rick doctored the footage. Ethan nodded grimly. This puts a target on you, and anyone helping you. Maya swallowed hard, her lips pale. Lennox needs me to disappear. Rick will make sure of it. Cooper barked once, sharp, clipped, before sprinting to the door, claws scraping against the wooden floor. Ethan moved quickly, slipping on his heavy brown jacket, the one that still carried faint burn scars from a warehouse accident years back. He motioned Maya to stay low while he approached the window. Through the curtain of snow, a pair of headlights crawled up the narrow road that led toward his cabin, too slow for a passerby, too deliberate. A dark SUV, government plates, not good. Maya, we need to move. She winced as Ethan helped her stand, her legs shaky, but determined. Are they police? No, Ethan said, grabbing his keys and sliding his arm around her waist. They're the ones who don't ask questions. He guided her out the back door, into a world of white wind and stinging flakes. Cooper stayed close, his breath steaming, fur bristling along his spine. Ethan's truck sat partly buried under snow, an old blue pickup with dents that told stories of past winters and stubborn survival. He opened the passenger door, helping Maya in. The SUV reached the cabin driveway. Doors slammed, voices cut through the wind. Search everything! She's close! Ethan didn't wait. He revved the engine, the truck groaning like an animal waking reluctantly from hibernation. The wheels fought against the packed snow until Cooper barked sharply, as if commanding the machine itself. The truck lurched forward. They barely made it onto the forest road when a second vehicle appeared behind them, Officer Rick Hudson's black patrol truck. Rick was a tall, broad-shouldered man in his early 40s, with blonde hair kept too perfectly trimmed and pale eyes that rarely blinked. His reputation in the town was spotless. Clean arrests, community events, even charity patrols. But Maya had seen the version of him that few knew, the temper that cracked through his smile, the willingness to bend rules when nobody watched, the hunger for approval from men like Lennox. And now, he was hunting them. The truck's siren blared once before Rick accelerated, tires skidding dangerously close. "Hold on!" Ethan shouted. They burst out onto an abandoned shipping lot near the frozen riverbank. Rows of rusted blue and red containers looming like silent giants. Snow whirled between them, narrowing visibility into shifting corridors of white and metal. Rick followed, his headlights slicing through the storm. Maya's breathing hitched, but she lifted her head, scanning the maze. "Take the left," she said suddenly. "There's a dead end on the right. He'll try to force us there." Ethan took her word. As he swerved left, Rick attempted to cut them off, but Cooper acted first, leaping in the truck bed and barking ferociously, startling Rick enough to miss the angle. His patrol truck skidded, scraping hard against a container wall. Ethan pushed the old pickup as fast as he dared, weaving through the labyrinth until they reached a gap leading toward the tree line. A narrow path of white lay ahead, barely a road, but enough. Once they broke free of the containers, Ethan slowed just enough to avoid spinning out. Maya pressed her forehead to the cold window, her voice trembling with something deeper than fear. Why did you help me? Most people would have left me there." Ethan didn't look at her. The road demanded his eyes, but his voice softened, low and steady. "Because I know what it feels like," he said, "to be left under the snow and asked to freeze quietly." The storm carried his words into the world, like something carved from truth. Behind them, Rick's headlights appeared again, distant but relentless. They weren't safe yet, but something had shifted. Maya saw it in the set of Ethan's jaw, the protective stance of Cooper, the way the snow parted ahead of them, as though carving a path for three souls who refused to be buried. For the first time since the ordeal began, she allowed herself to believe they might survive. Snow drifted across the narrow county road as Ethan steered his aging pickup toward the outskirts of Rust River. The storm had calmed but not softened. The air still carried the iron taste of winter, and the wind carved long, whistling notes across the farmland. Maya lay in the back seat wrapped in blankets, her skin pale, her breath steadier than the night before, but still shallow. Cooper curled beside her like a guardian carved from fur and vigilance, ears twitching, eyes watchful for threats the others might miss. Ethan's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, partly from cold, partly from the weight of what he had learned and what he feared was still coming. He turned onto a gravel lane leading toward a sagging metal workshop. A hand-painted sign read, "Marshall Repairs," letters fading beneath soot and time. Inside lived Dale Marshall, a man Ethan once trusted with his life in Afghanistan. Dale had been a wiry, sharp-eyed, explosive specialist with a grin that lit up desert nights. Now, rumors said he rarely left his garage. War had taken its share of Ethan, but it had hollowed Dale out differently, left him jittery around crowds, sleepless without the hum of machines, wary of human voices, but strangely comforted by engines and wires. Ethan parked and stepped out. The moment his boots hit the snow, the garage door rattled open halfway. Dale stood in the doorway, a man in his late 40s with a narrow build, a sunken jawline, and a beard that looked cut with a pocket knife. His dark hair, once military short, now hung in uneven tufts. He wore a patched canvas jacket and fingerless gloves, and his eyes, quick, restless, flicking from Ethan to the truck and back, held the haunted look of someone who expected danger before conversation. "You brought trouble," Dale muttered, voice low and scratchy. "I didn't have a choice," Ethan answered. "I need your help." Dale hesitated, then lifted the door fully. The interior glowed with warm lamplight, cluttered with engine blocks, severed wiring harnesses, and a tangle of tools laid out with precision only someone with training would understand. It smelled of gasoline, cold steel, and stale coffee. Ethan carried Maya in as gently as he could, while Cooper stayed glued to his side, sniffing Dale once, then deeming him tolerable. Dale cleared a workbench, grabbing old jackets to soften it as a makeshift cot. "Who shot her?" he asked. "Rick," Maya whispered before Ethan could answer. Her voice cracked like dry wood. Dale's head jerked slightly. Recognition, or maybe disbelief. Rick Turner? The golden boy of the department? That Rick? Dale scoffed, pacing. "Yeah, that tracks. Always had eyes too sharp for his own good. Never trusted the smooth ones." Ethan handed Maya's phone to Dale. "We need whatever you can pull from her footage." Dale took the phone with surprising steadiness. Technology anchored him. Machines didn't lie, didn't betray, he didn't bleed. He plugged it into a scratch laptop, fingers typing in clipped, efficient bursts. As data loaded, Dale asked no questions. He simply dissected the information with the precision of a surgeon operating in silence. After nearly 20 minutes, he exhaled sharply. "Found it. The Riverside plant logs. Someone wiped the official files, but the phone caught a mirrored upload. Just fragments, but enough." He pointed at the screen, where rows of corrupted timestamps pulsed. "They're planning a test release around midnight, not a routine test. This is prep for a purge." Ethan's stomach tightened. Meaning? Meaning they'll activate the emergency sensor chamber and detonate it. Boom. Dale mimed an explosion with his fingers. The blast wipes all evidence the sensors were disabled on purpose. After that, they pin the sabotage on our officer here, and she conveniently dies in the snow. His jaw twitched. Clean, simple, approved by corporate. Maya closed her eyes, pain twisting her features. "Lennox, he ordered it, and Rick followed because he wants the promotion tied to that contract." Dale tapped the screen. "If the chamber blows and the test valves open, the containment lines aren't stable enough to hold. A release of that size into frozen air, wind carries it straight over Rust River before sunrise." Ethan looked out the frosted window. Snowflakes drifted past like white ashes. Town lights shimmered faintly in the distance, so peaceful, so unaware. Dale leaned against his workbench, rubbing the bridge of his nose. If they pull that test off, every family in this town breathes poison by morning. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with rage buried under years of helplessness. "We've both seen what toxic gas does. Civilians won't stand a chance. The memory knifed through Ethan. A village in the desert, innocent stumbling through yellow fog, their cries muffled, their lungs burning. He swallowed hard. He had spent years running from nightmares like that, hiding in the quiet woods of Rust River, convincing himself that war could no longer reach him. But war didn't need a battlefield. Sometimes it walked through snow in the shape of a secret. Dale looked at Ethan, eyes suddenly clear. "You came here because you knew I'd say yes." "I came here because you're the only one who can help me stop this," Ethan replied. Dale exhaled, long and shaky, then pushed himself upright. "Then we stop it. But we'll need a way in that Rick won't expect." He rummaged through a crate, handing Ethan an old maintenance badge. "Still works. I kept it after they fired me for reacting poorly to stress." Their words, not mine. Ethan felt the weight of the plastic card, like holding a piece of Dale's broken history. "You never told me you worked at Riverside." Dale shrugged. "Didn't matter. Nobody cares about the man who knows where the cracks are. They only care when the cracks become earthquakes." Maya watched them with dim, determined eyes. "We have to go tonight." "You're not going anywhere until you can stand," Ethan said firmly. She pushed herself up with difficulty. "If I don't go, you won't get past the security checkpoints, and I know the layout better than Rick thinks I do." Cooper nudged her hand gently, as if agreeing without question. Dale drummed his fingers on the table. "Midnight is 3 hours away. Best window is before the shift change at 11. Security is thinner then. They also won't expect a wounded cop and a washed-up veteran to stroll in with a half-disabled dog." "Cooper isn't disabled," Ethan snapped automatically. Dale raised a brow. "Never said he was, just said he limps. And men like Rick underestimate anything that limps." Ethan knew Dale was right. He also knew this night might end with none of them walking out. But he looked at Maya, her bruised temple, her split lip, her resolve burning under layers of exhaustion. And something inside him steadied. He wasn't just fighting for truth. He was fighting to prevent a nightmare he had already lived once. Dale began gathering gear, a thermal cutter, insulated gloves, chemical filters. He moved with a precision that bordered on ritual. Ethan prepared the truck, reinforcing the rear cabin, clearing space for Maya. Cooper followed them with unwavering loyalty, limping slightly from overexertion but refusing to sit. As they loaded up, Dale paused beside Ethan. "You know," he said quietly, "we used to talk about what we'd do if life ever gave us a second shot. Maybe this is yours. Maybe saving this town is how you stop running." Ethan didn't answer, but the cold air filled with a truth he couldn't deny. They drove off toward Riverside Plant, the storm rising again, snow curling off the road like ghosts lifting from the earth. Ahead of them waited danger, betrayal, and a battle neither man had asked for, but both knew how to face, because some crossroads weren't just moments. They were turning points the world forced upon you, demanding you choose who you wanted to be when the snow finally settled. The blizzard thickened around the outskirts of Rust River as Ethan, Maya, Dale, and Cooper moved toward the Riverside Plant under the muted glow of a half-buried moon. Snow whipped across the frozen access road like torn fabric, and each step came with the crunch of ice breaking under their boots. The old chemical plant, its metal siding dulled by decades of corrosion, loomed like a sleeping monster hunched against the riverbank. Red warning lights blinked faintly through the storm, their glow pulsing as though the building itself had a heartbeat. Dale led the way across a deserted maintenance yard, his breath forming uneven clouds as he guided them toward a low, rust-streaked structure built beside the main facility. He had once worked here years ago, back when the plant was under different management, before oversight was quietly guttied and safety became a performance rather than a commitment. His gait was heavy, deliberate, shaped by an old back injury he sustained during a failed evacuation drill long before he ever joined the service. The limp was barely noticeable unless one looked closely, but it revealed itself now in the way his shoulders tightened when climbing over obstacles. Cooper pressed close to Ethan's side, tail low, ears pricked forward. The dog's sable fur bristled each time the wind carried unfamiliar scents from the metal labyrinth ahead. His age showed in the slower rise of his chest, but his gaze held that unwavering intensity forged from years on the battlefield. Ethan felt his pulse steady whenever Cooper leaned against him. Even now, in the teeth of winter, the dog anchored him against spiraling flashbacks. They reached the small utility building Dale once used as an entry point. The steel door had a cracked frost line running diagonally across it. Dale crouched and brushed away the snow from a concealed latch near the frame. "Still here?" he muttered. His voice shook, not from cold, but from memory. Inside, the warmth vanished entirely. The narrow corridor reeked faintly of solvent and old machinery. Pipes rattled overhead as if announcing their arrival. Maya walked behind Ethan, her breathing shallow but steady. She had regained enough strength in the past hours to stand firm, though the purple bruising along her ribs and collarbone pulsed with pain each time she inhaled. Still, her expression remained sharp, the eyes of someone who had been betrayed but not broken. "This tunnel bypasses most of their cameras," Dale whispered, "but the last stretch may still have motion sensors." His blue eyes, normally calm and thoughtful, now glinted with restrained fear. He had always been cautious, something shaped by childhood. Growing up the son of a line worker, he had lost his father to a refinery explosion caused by ignored warnings. Ever since, Dale had learned to see danger before others even sensed a shift in the wind. They descended through a grated vent shaft that opened into a maintenance crawl space. On their hands and knees, they moved through the metallic canyon, lit only by Maya's small tactical flashlight. The beam cut across welded joints, worn insulation, and condensation forming along the ceiling. The tunnel seemed to amplify sound, every scrape of a knee, every shallow breath, and the muted thump of Ethan's heart seemed louder. Eventually, they reached a vertical chute that led into the basement level of the plant. Dale signaled for silence. Faint voices drifted down the chute, 2 guards patrolling. From the cadence of their speech, Ethan could tell they were relaxed, unaware of the trio inching their way above them. He peered down the grating and saw 2 men in security jackets, one tall and lanky with a nervous twitch in his jaw, the other broad-shouldered, walking with false confidence. Both carried flashlights that swept lazily over the concrete floor. Ethan waited until their footsteps faded toward an adjacent wing before lifting the grate. Cooper descended first, landing noiselessly. Ethan followed, muscles tensed from effort and cold. Maya climbed down more slowly, gripping the metal rungs with stiff fingers, every movement sending a shock of pain down her side. Ethan placed a steadying hand on her arm as she landed. They moved deeper into the facility until they reached a narrow platform overlooking the central processing chamber. The chamber was lit by red emergency lamps that cast long shadows across machinery, gauges, and thick pipes snaking through the ceiling like veins. A low hum vibrated through the metal grating beneath their feet, a sound that felt like the breath of something dangerous waking up. "There," Dale said, pointing to the far end of the chamber. The sensor room, its door partially open, glowed faintly with yellow hazard lights. Through the gap, they glimpsed wires coiled neatly around a rectangular device strapped to a panel, the explosive charge. If triggered, it would detonate the sensor array, causing chaos and allowing Riverside to claim an accident, enough to discredit Maya fully. Ethan crouched, studying the layout. 2 guards near the control wing, one patrolling this level, he whispered. "And Lennox and Rick?" Maya asked, tension tightening her posture. "Control room," Dale replied. "They'll be close. They need direct access to the release system." A sudden metallic clang echoed through the chamber. Footsteps. Ethan motioned for silence and nudged Cooper behind a stack of drums. A figure approached, a young guard in a navy jacket, cheeks wind-burnt, eyes shifting anxiously. He held a clipboard but kept glancing around as though sensing something wrong. His name tag read J. Hollis. He looked barely 22, too young to be wrapped in corruption. He paused near the railing, sighing heavily. Maya watched him quietly, noticing the tremor in his grip. "He doesn't know," she whispered. "He thinks he's guarding equipment, not a crime scene." Ethan nodded. If Hollis raised an alarm out of confusion, they'd be cornered. Ethan stepped into the dim light with slow, measured ease. Hollis jumped, dropping the clipboard. Before he could speak, Ethan raised a finger to his lips. "Quiet. We're not here to hurt you." Hollis stared, eyes wide. "You're not shift leads? Who are—" "We're here to stop something that'll destroy this town," Ethan said softly. "And you can either walk away or stay and be part of it." The young man hesitated, but then something in his expression shifted. He nodded shakily. "I don't want trouble. I'll take the south corridor so I won't see anything. But you didn't talk to me, understood?" Ethan gave a grateful nod. Hollis left quickly, heart pounding loud enough that Ethan could almost hear it. Once alone, the group moved quickly. Dale entered the sensor room first, kneeling before the explosive. He was meticulous, his gloved fingers steady as they traced the wires. "Standard detonator, modified trigger," he murmured. "Give me a minute." Maya stationed herself beside the doorway, holding a metal wrench she'd picked up from a workbench. She knew a firearm would be too loud here. Her breath came in controlled, slow intervals despite her pain. She remembered the night Rick betrayed her. The disbelief, the gunshot, the cold water swallowing her. The memory fueled her resolve. When the detonator clicked free, Dale exhaled. "Done." "Good," Ethan said. "Because they're here." Rick's voice drifted down the catwalk, calm, arrogant, unmistakable. Lennox walked beside him, his sharp features set in irritation beneath his gray beard. Lennox had the posture of a man used to control, shoulders squared, jaw clenched, his stride brisk and unyielding. He had once been known as a brilliant operations manager, but greed had corroded him, turning intelligence into cunning. "We push the test now," Lennox said. "If the sensors don't respond, it backs up our story. Maya gets the blame, and the board signs off by Monday." Rick chuckled. "Shame about the girl. Pretty stubborn for someone who didn't know her place." Ethan stepped out with Cooper flanking him. "Her place isn't in a grave, Rick." Rick froze, Lennox startled, but Rick recovered fast, reaching for his holster. Cooper lunged, knocking him off balance, teeth gripping the padded sleeve of Rick's coat. Lennox bolted toward the control panel, but Maya intercepted him with the wrench, blocking his path with a fierce glare. "Not tonight," she said. The clash was swift. Ethan pinned Rick against a column, wrenching the weapon from his grip. Cooper held tight, growling deep in his throat. Lennox roared in frustration, trying to shove Maya aside, but despite her injuries, she held her ground long enough for Dale to rush in and tackle him. The alarms remained silent, the first victory of the night. And above them, the blizzard hammered against the roof like the world itself, urging them to finish what they came here to stop. The alarm klaxons inside Riverside Plant wailed like a mechanical beast awakening, red lights pulsing through the steel corridors as if the whole structure were breathing. Ethan's pulse hammered with them, matching rhythm for rhythm. The veteran moved low, controlled, with Cooper close at his heel, despite the dog's shallow breaths and wary stiffness. Behind them, Maya limped forward, her face pale under the fluorescent glow, but her eyes sharp with the clarity of someone who had already faced death once tonight and refused to face it again. They had breached deeper into the plant than Ethan ever planned. Pipes rattled along the walls, sweating condensation under the contrast of the icy night outside and the oppressive artificial heat inside. Every metal surface hummed with live pressure. Ethan could read this place the same way he read combat terrain. Angles, choke points, kill zones. Riverside Plant wasn't a factory tonight. It was a battlefield disguised as infrastructure. Ahead, the hallway split. To the right was the control wing. To the left, the sensor chamber, the place where Dale had said the explosives were mounted. The air smelled faintly chemical, something sharp and metallic beneath the recycled warmth. Ethan glanced at Maya. "You hold up?" he asked quietly. She nodded once, wincing at the movement. Her dark hair clung wet to the sides of her face, and her lips carried a bluish tint, but there was steel in her posture. Maya Brooks, young as she was, had the kind of stubborn fire he'd seen in soldiers twice her age. Dale, still breathing heavily from the climb through the maintenance ducts, stepped beside them. He was a large man, broad-shouldered, unshaven, sand-colored hair, pulled into a rough tie at the nape. Years of isolation and guilt from losing fellow soldiers abroad had shaped him into someone who seemed more ghost than human until now. But tonight his eyes were alive, focused, driven by a purpose he'd nearly forgotten he still possessed. "They're close," Dale murmured, pointing toward the right corridor. "Rick has to be in the control wing if he's preparing the override." "And Lennox," Maya whispered. Ethan jerked his chin toward the left. "If he wants the sensor chamber to blow, he'll be there." A moment of decision stretched between them. It was thin, taut, fragile, and then Ethan moved. "Dale, with me. Maya, stay with Cooper. When things break open, follow the noise." Maya opened her mouth to argue, but Cooper nudged her thigh gently, as if sensing her rising frustration. The dog's amber eyes reflected the emergency lights, full of warning and loyalty. Ethan didn't wait for her reply. He stepped toward the left corridor, boots striking the grated floor in precise, measured thuds, Dale close behind him. The corridor narrowed, steaming from the temperature differentials. At the end of it, through a glass-paneled door, they could see Lennox, tall, lean, impeccably, dressed even in a crisis. His silver hair was slicked back, and his gloved hands worked nervously over a control panel wired to the explosive rig on the sensor chamber wall. Something about him was unnervingly calm, like a man performing a duty he'd convinced himself was righteous. Ethan and Dale exchanged a look. Dale mouthed, "I'll handle the wiring." Ethan nodded. He slipped inside silently, but Lennox saw him in the reflection on the panel. The executive spun, surprise cutting across his otherwise composed face. "You shouldn't be here," Lennox said, voice trembling at the edges, though he tried to contain it. "None of this concerns you." "You made it my concern when you tried to kill a cop," Ethan replied. "And when you risked an entire town just to save a contract." Lennox's jaw twitched. "You don't understand the stakes." "Enlighten me," Ethan growled. But Lennox didn't answer. He lunged. The man moved with surprising speed for someone of his age, slamming into Ethan and driving both of them against the metal railing. Pain burst across Ethan's back, but he powered through it, wrestling Lennox down. Dale went straight for the wiring, his hands working feverishly. Outside, in the control wing, Maya limped forward with Cooper beside her. The hallway was too quiet, too still. She felt danger before she saw it, a prickling at the base of her neck. She stopped just in time for Rick to step from the shadows behind a row of overhead pipes, gun drawn. "Drop it," Rick snarled. Maya froze. Her breath hitched, her pulse roaring in her ears. Cooper growled low, teeth baring. The officer's face, someone she once trusted, was twisted with fear and fury, a crackling storm behind his eyes. Rick's voice thinned, stretched tight. "You should have stayed gone." He moved faster than she could blink. In one savage motion, Rick struck Maya with his gun, sending her sprawling. Cooper launched forward, a blur of muscle and instinct, slamming into Rick's arm. The shot went wild, ricocheting off the steel walls with a scream of sparks. Rick cursed, grappling with the dog. Cooper bit into the padded sleeve of Rick's jacket, holding on even as Rick pummeled him with his free fist. Maya forced herself up, vision fractured by pain. She reached for her sidearm, but her fingers trembled. The memory of cold water, of drowning, of Rick's face above her as he thought she died, everything collided in her chest. Breath stuttered, panic threatened to choke her, but Cooper yelped, a sharp, wounded cry, and that broke whatever held her paralyzed. Maya steadied her shaking hands, aimed, and fired at Rick's forearm, not to kill, but to disarm. The bullet struck true. Rick screamed, dropping the gun. Cooper staggered away, one hind leg buckling, but still standing guard. Maya rushed to the dog's side. "Good boy." Good boy. Stay with me. Her voice wavered, but her grip was steady. Back in the sensor chamber hall, Ethan overpowered Lennox, pinning him against the wall. Lennox flailed weakly as Ethan shouted over his shoulder, "Dale! Almost there!" Dale barked. The last wire snapped free, neutralizing the charge seconds before it could detonate. Dale sagged with relief, sweat tracing dirty lines down his face. And then, silence. The alarms cut abruptly. The lights steadied. The entire plant held its breath, waiting for the world to decide whether it would end in fire or continue in cold. Ethan dragged Lennox to his feet. It's over. Lennox didn't fight anymore. He simply sagged forward, as if the weight of his choices had finally crushed whatever arrogance had kept him upright. His voice cracked. "I was trying to save the company." "Not tonight," Ethan said. Maya and Cooper appeared at the corridor's far end. She was bruised, limping, shaking, but alive. Cooper leaned against her, stubborn and proud, despite his bleeding leg. The sight carved something deep and painful into Ethan, something like grief mixed with fierce relief. They had survived the night. The town would survive the winter, and none of it would be because of luck. It would be because of them. The first warmth of March came quietly to Rust River, almost shy in its arrival. Snow still clung stubbornly to the shaded banks of the river, but thin streaks of sunlight pressed against them, carving slow silver lines that whispered of a changing season. From the porch of Ethan Walker's small red brick house, the world looked as if it were finally exhaling after months of holding its breath. The thawing air carried the scent of wet earth, pine bark, and something else Ethan hadn't felt in years: promise. Inside, Cooper slept on his old wool blanket, his large German shepherd chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. His right hind leg bore a thin surgical scar, pale against the darker fur, but he seemed almost proud of it, the mark of a victory he had fought for alongside his human. He was older now, nearly 8, a dog whose muzzle carried soft strokes of gray, but his amber eyes still sparked when he sensed Ethan nearby. Ethan eased into a wooden chair he had built himself, running a hand over the grain. He had carved every groove, sanded every edge, stained it the warm brown of river mud in summer. His hands no longer shook as they once did when holding tools. The tremors that came from memories of war had softened. Working with wood had given him a way to listen to silence without fearing it. And today, silence felt like a companion, not a threat. A knock sounded at the door, light, familiar, and patient. Maya Brooks stepped inside with a shy smile, brushing melting snow from her dark hair. Since the night they stopped Lennox and Rick, the bruises on her face had faded into faint shadows, but her eyes, the determined, deep-set hazel eyes of a woman who had stared down betrayal, had only grown clearer. She wore her new uniform jacket, navy blue with a thin silver stripe across the shoulder. Lieutenant. Promotion came quickly after the investigation exposed Rick's crimes and after the Riverside plant scandal unraveled. "Morning," Maya said. "I hope I'm not too early." "You're fine," Ethan replied, voice quiet but warm. "Cooper's been waiting for you." At the mention of her name, Cooper thumped his tail, stretching himself up with a soft groan. Maya knelt, scratching gently under his chin. The dog leaned into her touch with a tenderness that made Ethan's chest tighten unexpectedly. A few months ago, he thought he'd never trust anyone enough to let them this close. Not to him, not to his dog, not to his life. Maya stood and unzipped her jacket. "Town Hall wants you to know," she began carefully, "that the Veterans Center has officially approved your workshop program. They want you teaching woodworking, home repair, and, well, whatever you think helps." Ethan blinked. He had been volunteering for weeks, showing older vets how to mend broken stairs, how to build simple tables, how to make their hands steady again, by giving them something steadfast to hold. He hadn't expected anything more. "They want to pay me for it?" he asked. Maya nodded. "Full contract, starting next month?" He let out a slow breath. For years after returning from Afghanistan, Ethan never thought he'd find stability again. He had lost friends, lost direction, nearly lost himself in the grips of PTSD. But now, here was a steady job, purpose, and the quiet satisfaction of making spaces safer and warmer for others like him. "Congratulations," Maya said softly. "You earned it." Ethan looked away, clearing his throat. Praise still sat awkwardly on his shoulders. The afternoon sun climbed higher, scattering glitter across the river. Cooper wandered to the porch, nose lifted as if checking the breeze for anything out of place. Ethan and Maya followed him outside. The wooden boards creaked gently beneath their feet. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Silence. Again. Comfortable. Finally, Maya turned to him. "You doing okay today?" Ethan considered her question seriously. "Mostly. Some mornings are rough, nights too, but it's better. I'm better." Maya's expression softened. She knew exactly what better meant. Not cured, not untouched, just moving forward, one breath at a time. "And you?" Ethan asked. She hesitated before answering. "Some days I still hear Rick's voice, still feel the cold water from that drain. But knowing what we stopped, what could have happened to this town, it helps." She paused. "And you help." The words hung in the air like a small lantern against the lingering winter. For months, their connection had grown slowly. Quiet dinners, long walks with Cooper, evenings spent fixing things around the house or sharing stories neither of them had said aloud in years. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rushed. It was honest. Ethan reached into a small wooden box resting on the porch railing. Inside was a simple silver ring, thin, unpolished in places, handmade. He had carved it himself from a piece of reclaimed metal, shaping it during quiet evenings when sleep felt out of reach. On the inside band, barely visible, were 3 small engraved words. "We survived winter." He held it out to her without ceremony. No rehearsed speech, just truth. "Maya," he said, voice roughened by cold and emotion. "I'm not promising perfection, but I want to build something with you, something steady, something real." Maya's breath hitched softly. "You sure you want this?" she asked. "This life? With me?" Ethan nodded once. "I spent years believing winter would never end. You helped me see spring again." She stepped closer, eyes glossy with warmth. "Then yes," Maya whispered. "I want this life, with you." Behind them, Cooper barked once, a sharp, approving sound that echoed across the quiet riverbank, as if stamping the moment into permanence. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger. The last patches of snow glimmered in the fading light, and somewhere overhead, a flock of geese cut across the sky, their wings beating a rhythm of seasons turning. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was the beginning of something built from scars, from courage, from survival, and from the stubborn hope that even after the harshest winter, warmth could return. And on the Rust River that day, spring truly began. When the long winter finally loosened its grip on Rust River, the town carried with it a story that would be retold for generations. It was not a tale of heroes with shining armor, but of ordinary people, worn, wounded, and tired, who chose courage at a moment when fear could have ruled. Ethan, a veteran haunted by yesterday's shadows, found his purpose again not through strength, but through compassion. Maya, a young officer betrayed by those sworn to protect her, discovered that survival wasn't just a matter of luck. It was the quiet miracle of being found by the right souls at the right time. And Cooper, the loyal K9 with scars of his own, reminded everyone that sometimes faith comes on 4 legs and arrives exactly when we need it. Their journey became a gentle sermon for the whole community, that healing is not a race, and hope can grow even in frozen places. When people choose to stand together, despite past pain, despite fear, darkness loses its power. Some miracles don't come with thunder or bright lights. Sometimes God works quietly, through a veteran stopping at the right moment, through a dog refusing to walk past danger, through strangers choosing kindness over fear. And maybe that's the message for all of us today. In a world that often feels cold, be the warmth someone is praying for. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to leave a prayer for someone who is struggling tonight. Share this video, comment your thoughts, and subscribe so these stories of hope and courage can reach others who need them. May God bless you, guide your steps, protect your family, and fill your home with peace today and in every season to come. Amen.